Welcome back to Dear Desk Diary. This is a podcast where we answer your workspace problems. My name's Holly and I am your host. And today we're talking about a very interesting topic. There is so much empty space in London. This is something that my guest is passionate about. There's also a real demand for office space. And also a load of people who have way too much space in their offices and don't necessarily know what to do with it. So I'm very excited to introduce my guest today. Tom has been working in startups for the last 10 years, starting his career as account manager for digital brands in ad agencies. He then joined the commercial team of a social media startup, where he managed various customer acquisition campaigns, where he met his now co-founder, Sanj Mahal. Inspired by the co-working industry and the lack of versatile workspace options for freelancers and remote teams, Tom and Sanj co-founded &Co in 2017 and more recently NOHQ, a platform that connects companies with design-led office space you can book by the day, week or month. So whether you're a large team, a small startup or working solo, NOHQ has a space for you.
For sure.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So over to you. How did this all start? Tell us about your journey.
So I guess the best place to start is &Co probably. I met Sanj at this social media startup before &Co, but we started looking at what was out there for freelancers in terms of remote work and where they could work from, and found that it was really limited. Mm-hmm. You either work from home, which not that many people actually like doing. It might be quite nice on a Monday or on a Friday, but for the rest of the week, especially as a freelancer, you start to feel quite isolated and you lose kind of creativity and you're staring at the same four walls every single day in, day out. It's either that or you go and work from a coffee shop around the corner where it's crowded. You don't know what the Wi-Fi is going to be like. A lot of the coffee shops at the time were turning their Wi-Fi off because they didn't want people sitting there for 6-7 hours and having one coffee. And you're not guaranteed a space where you can sit and work, etc., etc. The other end of the spectrum was co-working spaces, and they seem to be popping up on every single street corner at the time. You look at the WeWorks of the world, the office groups, etc., etc., etc. You couldn't walk 100 yards down the road in London without kind of coming across a new one. So we looked at what they were doing to attract this kind of new demographic of people working remotely and found that they were just mimicking the hospitality sector. If you walk into, say, a WeWork or any of them, to be honest, any of the communal spaces of these workspaces look and feel almost identical to walking into a restaurant or a hotel lobby or even a pub sometimes. So our argument was, why aren't we using existing space that already exists all around us in the form of hospitality venues? And so we launched &Co, which is basically a remote work booking platform where we partner with now mainly hotels that have kind of spare capacity in their lobby spaces or in their meeting rooms, where our members can book through the platform and book a workspace where they can sit and work. And we go and put in our own Wi-Fi and all that kind of stuff. So we make it a really decent place to sit and work that isn't a crowded coffee shop, isn't at home, and it gives you that kind of third option, and it's only 20 quid a month as well. So we launched that business about 7.5 years ago now. Obviously then lockdown hit. It hit us pretty hard working with hospitality venues. I mean, it hit a lot of businesses very hard, but hospitality obviously just shut down for a couple of years basically. So we kind of lost our workspaces overnight. They were still on the platform, but we just had to put everyone on pause. And what started happening, especially in between the two lockdowns, was that a lot of teams started getting in touch. So previously &Co was built for individuals looking for workspaces, normally freelancers or very, very small businesses. And then almost overnight, we started getting a lot of teams get in touch saying, look, we need spaces to sit and work together as a team. We've got rid of our big office space. We just need somewhere to get the team back together every once in a while that we can sit and work from. We realized that &Co wasn't quite the right product for them. We started putting them in a load of meeting rooms in central London and hotels where we literally had companies booking the same meeting room for 2 days a week for the next 6 months, which was great for us. But at the time, we looked at the space that we had available and found that actually a lot of central London hotels, the meeting rooms are shoved underground and they're just not great places to sit and work for 2 days straight. You don't really have breakout areas and there's no natural light, and they feel very sort of conference building-esque. So we started looking at what was out there in terms of space that could potentially accommodate this new behavior that we were seeing in teams booking basically a desk or a meeting space or an office by the day, and found that because of lockdown and a lot of hybrid working, that a lot of offices now, or a lot of companies, weren't going to their offices every day of the week anymore. They were maybe using their space 2 or 3 days a week, but that meant that they had 2 or 3 days a week that space was just sitting empty, and it's an expensive asset. And we found that we could connect the companies looking for super flexible solutions with companies that had the space to spare but didn't really know what to do with it. And one of our first ones, it kind of came about as a bit of an accident, because one of the first ones,
best businesses do.
Yeah, it was
as an accident, I think.
Well, it was the beauty of it was it was completely demand led, I should say, and we had all this kind of demand sitting there, but we just didn't really know initially what to do with it until a friend of mine works for a fashion brand down in Brixton. They'd invested a lot of money in this beautiful office space pre-lockdown. Lockdown hit. They realized they weren't using it, and so initially she'd contacted me to say, can we rent out the meeting room on Andco and make a little bit of extra revenue that way? So I went down and checked out the space, and it's an unbelievable office sitting empty. And while this was going on, I had all this demand suddenly coming in from one side looking for space, and I said, look, I think I could probably rent out your entire office. And within days, we had someone sign a contract for the next 12 months for, I think they go in on Monday and Tuesday. And we made that office, tens of thousands of pounds overnight. So suddenly, obviously, penny dropped. We thought, God, there must be way more of these types of spaces around. So we started looking at offices that we knew had really nice, or companies that we knew had really nice offices. We really only work with design-led spaces. And as you can imagine, there are hundreds, if not thousands, around London that aren't using their space to the full capacity anymore, because they don't go in on a Monday or on a Friday, or they have their kind of set days that they go in, and for the rest of the time that space is just sitting empty. And so, long story short, that's how NOHQ was born. We sort of separated out the brands because Andco is still and still is very much for kind of individuals, and NOHQ, which stands for No Headquarters, is for teams looking for space that they can use on a regular basis. And that's grown from strength to strength. We've got, I think, about 75 offices that are now signed up. We're very picky with the types of offices that we work with, just because we want them to be as sort of design-led as possible. And we feel like if you're going to get the team back into an office environment, you may as well make it a really nice place to be, and a bit of a destination. Otherwise, people just aren't going to come. And we also, as a kind of side project, we do a lot of kind of typical broker-esque things as well. So if someone's looking for a full-time office in a co-working space or in a serviced office, for example, then we'll broker that deal for them as well.
So people rent out like banks of desks, or is it like meeting rooms, or
so it can be anything really. So we have a lot of companies that will rent out banks of desks in their offices. They might be going in full-time anyway, but because they've maybe scaled back on the number of employees that they have or whatever, they will have spare desks kicking about their office that they can now rent out. And so we place a lot of individuals in those that will just go and hot desk in there for a monthly basis, or we have teams of people that will take banks of desks, and it becomes a really nice kind of shared office environment where we always try and match up the demand with the supply as much as we can when it comes to kind of the type of offices, or the type of companies that are taking the space, and the type of companies that are hosting. And then on the flip side, there are companies that will take the entire office space for a full day, and they'll book it in for the next 6 to 12 months, for example. So it's a bit of everything. And then, as you mentioned, meeting rooms, we have a lot of companies that will go and book individual meeting rooms in company offices as well, which is also a really nice use of the space. We've got a lot of clients that have gone fully remote post-lockdown, are now looking for somewhere that they can get the team back together every once in a while. Even if it's just on a quarterly basis, they'll come and do a big team away day. We've got a client that has 130 employees, and they go and book out one office space for a day a quarter. They do all their workshops, big team events.
Wow, a workspace that's someone else's workspace.
Yep.
And that team's just not in that day.
They're just not in that day, and they're making thousands of pounds from the space that they're not using.
Wow.
And the beauty of it is that these spaces that are sitting empty are perfectly designed for companies already. It's not like we're trying to change the layout or change the way the space is used. They're already set up as offices. So obviously on the website, you can see what they look like. We go and take all the photos of the spaces, make them look beautiful, which is very easy because they're all very photogenic, design-led spaces. But you can see exactly what they have on offer. You can go and view the space as well if you want to before. So it's really, and I hate using this as an example, but it's a bit like an Airbnb, but for workspace and in that sense. Obviously Airbnb next level, but we are looking to build it out into much more of a kind of live availability type platform where, you can literally go on and find an office for next week that you can go and book by the day rather than getting tied into long leases.
So you manage the kind of operations around it rather than the office. Do you know what I mean? So Airbnb is obviously self-managed in a way. They do their own bookings and whatever.
Yeah, so at the moment so inquiries come to us through the website, and then we have a discovery call. We find out exactly what they're looking for, because they might have been on the website and seen one space and thought that's perfect for us, but actually we know that there's one waiting in the wings, or there's another one that's maybe geographically not quite correct for them, but is perfect in terms of the size and the meeting rooms that they have and the breakout spaces, or, they've got outdoor areas for a summer party or whatever it might be. And so we do quite a lot of matchmaking in that sense. I think with the way AI is going and all the rest of it, not to use any buzzwords, but, there will be a lot of matchmaking that can happen without us necessarily being involved going forward. But at this moment in time, we launched NOHQ just over a year ago. We're basically in sort of data gathering, fact finding mode, where we're seeing the type of inquiries that are coming through, the type of companies that are looking for this space. I actually had a call yesterday with a company that has 355,000 employees worldwide, and the lead came through the website, and I thought, wow, what
dollar signs in your eyes.
Yeah, exactly. But it's what was interesting to me is that the demand is there across the board. It's not like we work a lot with startups because it works well for them to have that flexibility, but you've got these multinational corporations that are looking at flexible work and flexible work setups in the same way. Their leases might be coming to an end, and now they don't need a space to call an HQ anymore necessarily. But what NoHQ does is that it gives that kind of reliability of booking, and you can book for the next 12 months if you wanted to. So that you've got it every Monday and Tuesday, or Tuesday, Wednesday, or whatever you want it to be. But you've got it booked in. You've got that space that you can be really proud to call your own as well, because we're very picky, as I've said. We curate the spaces on the platform, and we'll go and see all the spaces that come on, and we build long-lasting relationships with the clients and the spaces as well. So it's a real mix of different inquiries that comes through, and at the moment we're kind of priding ourselves in trying to cater for everyone, which is potentially a dangerous route to go down, but for us it's really valuable to place an individual because of the feedback we get, but also a team of 150 because we get they're different use cases and they're different scenarios and they're different findings for us.
So you must have so much data.
In terms of, so we get a lot of data on the AndCo side of things as well, because we go and put in our own Wi-Fi and infrastructure in that sense. It sounds a little bit scary, but we can actually see any smartphone that could have connected to our Wi-Fi. So we can start to see kind of footfall data, how people are using the spaces and all that kind of stuff. So you can start to build kind of data patterns on how people are moving around the city and, jumping from space to space, which is really cool.
Seeing any good trends? I suppose that's more on the Anco side with hospitality stuff.
I mean, the most obvious one is the days of the week that it's busy. Friday is dead.
That's washing day.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically the day that you spend at home doing other things that you haven't been able to do at the weekend or at the start of the week. So there's that. But also what's quite interesting is the time of the day as well. What we help our hospitality venues with is, when they should be running offers, for example, or when they should be opening during the morning. So obviously lockdown hit, but we were, through the data that we were gathering through the Wi-Fi boxes, we could tell them, actually, you've got X amount of footfall between the hours of 8 and 10 a.m. Why don't you open early, even if it's just for a coffee initially, and just see how it goes? And they just didn't have that data there before. Or a really nice one that I always try and make venues do as possible is an AndCo happy hour. Turning that, someone used this expression the other day, which I loved. It was turning the 9 to 5 into a 5 to 9. So these people that go and work from spaces from 9 till 5, then tie them in for the next 3 hours, because you're going to do a really nice 50% off drinks, and then they're there from 5 till 9 in the evening, and it's a really nice way to drive more footfall into hospitality venues and kind of boost traffic and sales that way as well.
Yeah, I find it so interesting. I know we've actually talked about this loads. It's like that like blend of hospitality and workspace, and how much it's changed.
For sure.
Like, people just don't need to sit in an office. Like, do you remember the days when, I mean, I was too young, but when offices were just like pods, and you'd have like walls around you and just like a desk, and it was like solo mission, working 9 to 5. Like, where did it even come from?
Yeah, that's that classic kind of image of like, you know,
cubicle farms,
cubicles,
that's what they're called.
Exactly, and you know, the phones ringing and all that kind of stuff. But that was an interesting shift that we saw with the rise of WeWork, and you know, who've done amazing things for the industry in terms of the way the offices are set up. But they, and we're kind of talking more on the Andco side here, but they were basically just mimicking hospitality, and they talk about hospitality a huge amount on their website. They talk about concierge, they talk about, you know, the feeling of the space, and I think that has really trickled over into private offices, and that's what we're finding with NOHQ for sure. I mean, we see obviously hundreds of offices on a kind of monthly basis, and people take real pride in how they're set up, and you know, how great they look now. And I think, you know, if you're going to get, as we've kind of mentioned before, if you're going to get people out of their homes, off their kitchen table or off their sofas and into a work environment again, then you really do need to make it a super nice place to be, and a place that really fosters community, or somewhere that if you're a freelancer that you're going to get potentially your next job from. You know, so it's sort of, it becomes much more than, it's a cliche, it's much more than an office, but it has to be.
Office managers should probably come from like hospitality background.
Yeah, and a lot of them do, right?
Yeah.
A lot of them are coming, you know, I've met loads of office managers that worked in hospitality, worked in hotels, have had that kind of hospitality training, and then, you know, understand how human beings work. You know, that's, and offices are becoming a much more transient place to be. They're like hotels, but, you know, hotels are very used to transient business people that will sit there on their laptops doing work, and that's what a lot of co-working spaces are like now. So it makes complete sense for the receptionists or the office managers to come from that kind of background, because they know how to communicate with people.
So the future, what's your plans?
So we've got quite aggressive growth plans across Europe, obviously, into the States. We've done a bit of work in New York. We've done a lot of research into cities that are similar in terms of their kind of working arrangements when it comes to hybrid as London. So we've got places like Amsterdam, Lisbon, Barcelona, Madrid, Berlin, Paris. And the beauty of NOHQ is that it is unbelievably scalable. You know, we don't own any of the spaces. It's not like we have to go and spend a fortune opening them up. We can get a team on the ground there that can go and onboard beautiful design-led offices that people want to rent by the day very quickly. So the scalability of it is definitely there. And we've basically spent the last year, as I said, on this kind of data gathering mode and fact finding mission, and just making sure that the concept works. And it's, luckily, touch wood, it's working well.
It's a brilliant idea. Mini co-working spaces.
Yeah, and that's, you know, we actually always said it's a really nice way for private offices to be able to compete with co-working spaces now. You know, you've got this kind of huge space that you're potentially not using, and rather than someone going down to a co-working space, you can, you know, attract them into yours. And as I said, you know, we don't necessarily need to build anything new, especially in London, even though there seems to be buildings popping up everywhere. But there's an unbelievable amount of space that is just sitting completely dead. I think the office vacancy in London is about 9% at the moment, which might not seem like a lot, but that is genuinely empty. That is 9% of all the office space not being used, and that's the highest it's been for a century.
Wow.
So it's that, you know, there's all this latent capacity that is sitting there doing nothing. And that's also, by the way, that figure doesn't include obviously the private offices that aren't using it, where you've got occupancy levels of maybe 30%. So for 2/3 of the week, that office is just not being used. You know, the private offices aren't being used. So, you know, the actual issue is way bigger than that 9%, which is where we're trying to come in. And I'm not saying we have all the solutions to empty office space in London. We're trying to see empty space as a kind of more of a launch pad to the next big idea or the next successful startup, you have this ability now to be able to go and have a really nice, beautiful office for a fraction of the price without being tied into a 3 or 5 year or 10-year lease. You've got somewhere that, when you're hiring people, the space that you meet is important. So you need somewhere that the team's going to be really proud to go into work for, rather than sitting in a coffee shop or, in a kind of dire co-working space. If you've got somewhere that feels like your own and you've got it and you can use it as if it's your own, it's a really nice environment to foster.
So we have 4 questions, which we're going to listen to.
I'm interested to know how much you can expect to make from spare office space in central London.
Yeah, so this is obviously the $1 million question that we get from a lot of spaces. The truth is it depends, obviously. I mean, it depends on your geographic location, how big the space is, the amenities that you have within the space. So whether you've got meeting rooms, showers, changing rooms, bike storage, all that kind of stuff. But we always say the golden rule is that you can probably expect to make somewhere between £30 and £50 per day per desk. So that obviously that figure changes depending on the length of the contract that they sign. So if someone signs up for the same 2 days for the next 12 months, that's going to be a very different price to someone just taking an ad hoc office by the day next week. Obviously, it depends on also if the offices want to take individuals or if they want to only take teams or whatever the inquiry ends up being. But yeah, normally it's £30 to £50 per desk per day. If you're looking at it from a kind of a monthly price point, it's probably anywhere between kind of £250 to £300 up to £600-700
What about like amenities? So like if an office has, like in our office, we get a really big Sainsbury's order every week and it's the best. Nice. And we've got smoothies and it's amazing.
Yeah.
Would people be allowed to, do you have issues with that? Of people coming in and using all their stuff and it's like that's not been paid for?
So a lot of this would be sorted out in the contract that is signed pre. So basically the way it works is that there is a license to occupy agreement that sits between the client and the host.
Yeah.
And the host can go to town in what they want to write into that contract. They can, they can put the fact that milk and tea and coffee is included because it'd be, it might get a bit tricky to kind of organize teas and coffees on a daily basis, or they can say, we'll chuck in X amount of hours of meeting rooms for you guys to use, or they do, anyone can use the meeting rooms whenever they want.
Yeah.
I mean, as a kind of crazy example, we've got a music management artist agency that we work with up in Islington, and they won a Grammy a few years ago, and they have the Grammy out in the office, and they've written into their contract that no one's allowed to pick up the Grammy, take selfies with it, all that kind of stuff. So you can go super granular in that initial agreement, and obviously then it's a case of negotiating that. So it's not something that we've had any issues with, because we try and organize all of that kind of stuff pre them actually starting and the first day that they're in. What we'd always suggest to offices to do is try and make it as much as a sort of all-inclusive package as possible. So the price that the client's going to be spending per desk per month, for example, should be all inclusive of things like teas and coffees and milk in the fridge and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, great, you guys do Sainsbury's order, that kind of stuff. I would probably exclude that kind of stuff from the contract, just because it could potentially get a bit messy. But it depends. It depends on the space. I guess the beauty of NOHQ is that there are so many different options on there. The offices are all so varied. So there is quite a lot of hand-holding initially, and it's a case-by-case basis and on the type of space that they're putting available, the amenities that they have, and all that kind of stuff.
Ready for the next one?
Yep.
I'm keen to know how much spare space you'd need to have to offer it for a NOHQ.
Yeah, so that one, it can be, as I said before, we have inquiries from individual desks all the way up to hundreds of desks. So we don't really say no to anyone if they're a beautiful office. So even if you have a couple of spare desks, we'll happily list that on the platform for you. Obviously, from a commercial standpoint, it's more efficient for us to have bigger offices on the platform. But we have, I guess our sweet spot is probably, anywhere from kind of 5 or 10 desks upwards to 50 or 60. Those are the ones that sell the best. We get a lot of individual inquiries through as well, and sometimes with those we tend to kind of bulk them together and say, we've got perfect space for 10 of you, do you want to go in as a bit of a collective where you can sort of create this beautiful community and work as freelancers together? And that works really well for them in particular, because, you know, isolation within the freelance community is massive. So if you're able to then suddenly have a space that you can go to work and there are 10 others of you there, then that's perfect. But yeah, in answer to the question, it can be anything from, you know, 1-2 desks up to hundreds of them if you wanted to. There's no figure that's too small, as long as the spaces are kind of up to scratch and design led and worth someone going and spending time in.
And then meeting rooms is separate.
So meeting rooms can be separate, yeah. So either you kind of bake that into the contract and you say, you know, you can have 10 hours of meeting rooms a month or unlimited, or they come at an additional cost. Again, it's sort of case by case dependent. It depends on how much the host is using that space already. If the client is booking an office by the day and they're taking the entire space, obviously meeting rooms are included because they're already in there. If they're sharing and say a host has 10 or 15 desks sitting empty and we find a client for them that takes all of those desks, then typically they do it on a kind of credit system, or they say there's 10 hours included for you. I think what we found, which has probably been the most interesting finding, is that meeting rooms actually aren't used as much as people think. It's quite an interesting sort of dynamic. People, they get obsessed with needing a meeting room, but actually they're not really used as much as people think. And then when they are used, they're used in exactly the same kind of time during the day. So I think that's why people think that they're always busy, because everyone's trying to book them in the morning or like mid-afternoon. Obviously they're empty over lunch or, you know, mid-morning. But we always say to the office hosts, look, I would just chuck in 10-15 hours of meeting rooms and I can guarantee you they'll probably use 30% of that. So yeah, it's case by case dependent, but we like any office that looks good.
Okay, next one.
What's the price range for the NOHQ spaces?
Yeah, so I mean, we kind of answered that one slightly without using the word "it depends" too much. It really does. It really does on geographic location and what they have on offer, and are they close to, you know, transport links and all that kind of stuff. But as I said, that the kind of the golden price that we always quote initially to clients is anywhere between £30 and £50 per desk per day. Obviously, the more desks they take, that's probably more towards the kind of the lower end. Or if it's a beautiful space in Soho where everyone wants to be, then it's probably more like 50-60 quid a desk per day, or £500-600 per month, that kind of thing.
We might have covered this, but the first question was, how much can someone expect to make? Assuming you obviously take a cut from that.
Yeah. So the way our model works is that we just take a commission from any of the business that we send to the host. So again, like an Airbnb, they obviously take a commission, and we only get paid when the office gets paid. So there's no risk for offices to be listed on the platform if they've got space to spare. It's only when inquiries come through, we then pass on those inquiries to the space, and then when everything is signed on the dotted line and the client is paid, that's when we then charge the host the commission. So it's a risk-free sort of model.
Exactly like Airbnb.
Exactly like Airbnb, and it seems to work well. We charge a little bit more than the kind of the typical broker does in London, but we, as I said, we like to think ourselves as matchmakers in the kind of the workspace sense, where we will try and, you know, get a client into a space that could really work for them, and vice versa. I mean, sometimes we get clients, or offices I should say, saying, you know, we don't want any recruiters, for example, because they're always on the phones, or
they're a rowdy bunch,
or whoever, you know, whatever industry, or they don't want competition in there. That's also quite a big one as well. So, you know, there is that kind of matchmaking side to it, which for us is actually probably the most exciting bit, and it sets us apart from typical brokers, other than obviously the offices and the private offices that we have on board. But it means that we get to speak to a lot of really cool companies and try and match them up to really cool spaces. So that's the kind of the sweet spot for us. And yeah, as you've said, we take a commission. We've got to make money somehow. So we just invoice at the end of the month.
That actually leads us on really nicely to the last question.
Should we be picky about who we rent our space out to?
Yeah, I think To a degree, yes. Obviously, it's your space, and it's a bit like letting someone into your home. You know, they've got to be right for the space, and vice versa. It works both ways. You know, the space has to be right for the client. You know, as I've said, competition is a big one. You probably wouldn't want your competition being in there, but then, you know, sometimes that can work in your favor. We work a lot with, you know, digital marketing agencies, for example, that have, you know, various different sort of touch points with clients, and, you know, we might match them up with a creative agency, and that works perfectly, or, you know, a video production agency, or whatever it might be. So, you know, it definitely works. It works in both ways.
Companies could end up merging.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in the future, where, you know, a smaller agency goes into a larger agency space and they get snapped up or bought or whatever. You know, there's definitely, I'd be amazed if there aren't case studies for that going forward.
Yeah, I just think the beauty, because I used to work for a co-working space.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it was watching people come together and help each other.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't in they weren't selling to each other necessarily, or exchanging services through money. It was just like the free knowledge that they'd give each other. And we had like a Slack channel with like thousands of members on it. And someone would just write like, oh, I'm looking for, you know, a gardener. And there'd always be someone like, yeah, I can do that. Yeah. You know, it's just an amazing thing. People coming together and like same thing, you know, businesses being like, actually, we can actually work together on these things. And you're just creating little mini versions of that. I love
Definitely.
it.
And it's sort of, we always, you know, it's a bit like someone looking over your shoulder, and, you know, you're able to ask for immediate feedback. If you're a startup, it's genius, right? If you're building a product that needs some customer feedback quite quickly, and you don't want to go and do a user testing session or whatever, but you're in a beautiful office with 40 or 50 other people, why wouldn't you go and ask them? Like, go and ask them, what, you know, is the UX right, or is the UI looking good, or, you know, what would you change if you were doing it? I think is that kind of stuff is invaluable, and that's what you don't get when you're working from home. Obviously, I mean, yes, you can do it over Slack and you can do it over various different things, but actually, that in-person collaboration and co-working, I mean, the clues in the name, it's, you know, that's a really powerful thing to be able to foster that community. And we're doing it, as you say, on a kind of micro scale, because these are private offices that we're working with. But if we can match up marketing agencies with production agencies, or architects with video production agencies, or photographers even, they're going to go and do interior shots for their latest projects, you know, that kind of stuff is kind of gold dust to us. And that's where we get way more excited about, you know, just brokering a deal where we put someone in a full-time office with grey walls, white walls for the next 12 months. Yeah. For us, it's way more interesting if we've got a small company in with another company that they can create business together. That's awesome.
I have a final question, which isn't recorded and didn't come from anyone, came from me, but I'm allowed to do what I like.
Yeah, you're the host.
Is there ever an issue with landlords?
So it's a good question, and it's something that it's a bridge that we have to cross every day, basically, when we're onboarding new offices. It depends. If we work a lot with architects and architecture studios that tend to own their own space, or a lot of them do anyway. In that case, they're the landlord, perfect. Yeah. Nothing needed. It's partly the reason why we have a license to occupy agreement rather than a sublease or a sublet.
Got it.
The host is still in charge of paying their rent. What they do alongside that is up to them, as long as they have, you know, they've got to pay the check at the end of the month. What we'd always suggest is for the host to check it with their landlord anyway. What we found is that a lot of landlords now are very open to that kind of arrangement anyway, because actually it means that they're not having churn in their own tenants. You know, if they can create a new revenue stream that's going to help them pay rent, like why would you, as a landlord, why would you forbid that? I mean, it depends obviously on certain things like valuation of the buildings and all that kind of stuff. There's a huge amount that you can go into, but we found that the license to occupy agreement is the way forward with it, and most landlords are happy with it. Obviously, we've had, you know, occasional ones that have said we don't really want to go down that route, and it depends on length of lease and all that kind of stuff. But 99% are happy to go with it, because it's, you know, it's a way for their tenants to make money to pay the bills. It's, you know, it makes sense.
Well, we've come to the end. we've done our questions.
Awesome. That felt very
Well,
quick.
Thank you so much. I know, flies by.
Yeah.
So you can connect with Tom on LinkedIn. The link will be in the show notes, and also the link to AndCo and NOHQ. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much.